My dear sir, as you know, you have been engaged for the Count's service. Your immediate superior is the superintendent of the village, who will give you all particulars about your work and the terms of your employment, and to whom you are responsible. I myself, however, will try not to lose sight of you. Barnabas, the bearer of this letter, will report himself to you from time to time to learn your wishes and communicate them to me. You will find me always ready to oblige you, insofar as that is possible. I desire my workers to be contented. The signature was illegible, but stamped beside it was Chief of Department, X. Wait a little, said Kay to Barnabas, who bowed before him. Then he commanded the landlord to show him to his room, for he wanted to be alone with the letter for a while. At the same time, he reflected that Barnabas, although so attractive, was still only a messenger, and ordered a mug of beer for him. He looked to see how Barnabas would take it, but Barnabas was obviously quite pleased and began to drink the beer at once. Then Kay went off with the landlord. The house was so small that nothing was available for Kay but a little attic room. And even that had caused some difficulty, for two maids who had hitherto slept in it had to be quartered elsewhere. Nothing indeed had been done but to clear the maids out. The room was otherwise quite unprepared. No sheets on the single bed, only some pillows and a horse blanket still in the same rumpled state as in the morning. A few sacred pictures and photographs of soldiers were on the walls. The room had not even been aired. Obviously, they hoped that the new guest would not stay long, and were doing nothing to encourage him. Kay felt no resentment, however, wrapped himself in the blanket, sat down at the table, and began to read the letter again by the light of a candle. It was not a consistent letter. In part, it dealt with him, as with a free man whose independence was recognized, the mode of address, for example, and the reference to his wishes. But there were other places in which he was directly or indirectly treated as a minor employee, hardly visible to the heads of departments. The writer would try to make an effort not to lose sight of him. His superior was only the village superintendent, to whom he was actually responsible. Probably his sole colleague would be the village policeman. These inconsistencies, no doubt about it, they were so obvious that they had to be faced. It hardly occurred to Kay that they might be due to indecision. That seemed a mad idea in connection with such an organization. He was much more inclined to read into them a frankly offered choice, which left it to him to make what he liked out of the letter, whether he preferred to become a village worker with a distinctive but merely apparent connection with the castle, or an ostensible village worker whose real occupation was determined through the medium of Barnabas. Kay did not hesitate in his choice, and would not have hesitated even had he lacked the experience which had befallen him since his arrival. Only as a worker in the village, removed as far as possible from the sphere of the castle, Could he hope to achieve anything in the castle itself? The village folk, who were now so suspicious of him, would begin to talk to him once he was their fellow citizen, if not exactly their friend. And if he were to become indistinguishable from Gerstacker or Leisman, and that must happen as soon as possible, everything depended on that, then all kinds of paths would be thrown open to him, which would remain not only forever close to him, but quite invisible, were he to depend merely on the favour of the gentleman in the castle. There was, of course, danger, and that was sufficiently emphasized in the letter, even elaborated with a certain satisfaction, as if it were unavoidable. That was sinking to the workman's level: service, superior, work, terms of employment, responsible, workers. The letter fairly reeked of it. And even though more personal messages were included, they were written from the standpoint of an employer. If Kay were willing to become a workman, he could do so, but he would have to do it in grim earnest, without any other prospect. Kay knew that he had no real compulsory discipline to fear. He was not afraid of that, and in this case least of all. But the pressure of discouraging environment, of a growing resignation to disappointment, the pressure of the imperceptible influences of every moment, these things he did fear. But that was a danger he would have to guard against. Nor did he let the letter pass over the fact that if it should come to a struggle, Kay had had the hardihood to make the first advances. It was very subtly indicated, and only to be sensed by an uneasy conscience. An uneasy conscience, not a bad one. It lay in the 3 words, "As you know," referring to his engagement in the Count's service. Kay had reported his arrival, and only after that, as the letter pointed out, had he known that he was engaged. Kay took a picture down from the wall and stuck the letter on the nail. This was the room he was to live in, and the letter should hang there. Then he went down to the inn parlour. Barnabas was sitting at a table with the assistants. "Oh, there you are," said Kay, without any reason, only because he was glad to see Barnabas, who jumped to his feet at once. Hardly had Kay shown his face when the peasants got up and gathered round him. It had become a habit of theirs to follow him around. "What are you always following me about for?" cried Kay. They were not offended and slowly drifted back to their seats again. One of them, in passing, said casually an apology, with an enigmatic smile, which was reflected on several of the others' faces. "There's always something new to listen to." And he licked his lips as if news were meat and drink to him. Kay said nothing conciliatory. It was good for them to have a little respect for him. But hardly had he reached Barnabas when he felt a peasant breathing down the back of his neck. He had only come, he said, for the salt cellar. But Kay stamped his foot with rage, and the peasant scuttled away without the salt cellar. It was really easy to get at Kay. All one had to do was to egg on the peasants against him. Their persistence, interference, seemed much more objectionable to him than the reserve of the others. Nor were they free from reserve either, for if he had sat down at their table, they would not have stayed. Only the presence of Barnabas restrained him from making a scene. But he turned round to scowl at them and found that they too were all looking at him. When he saw them sitting like that, however, each man in his own place, not speaking to one another, and without any apparent mutual understanding, united only by the fact that they were all gazing at him, he concluded that it was not out of malice that they pursued him. Perhaps they really wanted something from him and were only incapable of expressing it. If not that, it might be pure childishness, which seemed to be in fashion at the inn. Was not the landlord himself childish, standing there, stock still, gazing at Kay, with a glass of beer in his hand, which he should have been carrying to a customer, and oblivious of his wife, who was leaning out of the kitchen hatch, calling to him.